So, good evening, all, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. We have a reduced agenda tonight. We were hoping for an item relating to devolution, but it's not been possible due to timings of meetings on the combined authorities side. So we were hoping to receive sort of draft economic framework document to scrutinise. So that's quite frustrating, but I'm assured that we will get sight of that once the combined authority working group has seen it first. We will make space for it on our work plan because it's important that York has a strong voice on it. But that will mean other items may have to go, onto a future date. So we just have the one main item tonight, but firstly we'll get through the usual stuff. Any declarations of interest to declare? No. Okay, thank you. Yes, I will get on to that. Thank you. Cheers for the nudge, though. So we have a substitution tonight. So Councillor Jason Rose is here in place of Councillor Emily Nelson. Welcome, Councillor Rose. Councillor Healy's running a bit late, but he'll be with us ASAP. Councillor Kilbane is expected with the main item, but he's running a bit late as he's in another meeting as I speak, but he'll be with us hopefully ASAP. Have I covered everybody now? Councillor Wallace. Oh, forgive me, Councillor Waller, in place of Councillor Pearson. You just look so at home there. But yeah, thank you for those who are with us and those who've stepped in. In terms of public participation, we don't have any speakers tonight, which is a shame. But we had loads last time, so maybe it sort of evens out. In the papers, I don't think we have minutes from the previous meeting. Are you able to comment on that? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. We've just had a few new members starting, and in between that time, we've been picking up more meetings, and I just haven't got around to finishing them off.
Fair play. No, that's cool. Just so we know. So we'll probably have 2 sets of minutes next time around, but appreciate the clarification. Okay. Hi, Councillor Healy. No, you're okay. Don't worry. So without further ado, we'll get on to the main item, which is a look at the council's economic strategy and tourism strategy. So we'll get an update on progress with each of those. We have 2 officers with us tonight. We've got Catherine Daly and Brendan Patterson, is it? Forgive me. Yeah. So I normally wear glasses for this, but it's been I've had a lot to try and prepare for today, and that's the one thing I've forgot. But welcome and thanks for joining us tonight. Obviously, members have had time to read the papers provided, but if you could give a short overview, and then we'll open up for questions. There might be recommendations to put to the executive member, there might not be. We tend to sort of feel it out as we go in this committee, for better or worse. So yeah, after you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, good evening, members, and just to introduce myself for those who haven't met me before. So I'm Catherine Daly, Head of City Development. So the City Development team essentially covers economy, inward investment and business growth, regeneration, and then the local plan team as well. So key parts of city development, obviously very relevant to the economic strategy and the delivery of that for the city. Yeah, very grateful tonight for Brendan to also be here. He's not actually a City of York officer, but he is chair of the Tourism Advisory Board, which is the group that have been leading on the creation or development of the tourism strategy. So I thought rather than me try to explain the strategy, we extended an invite out to Brendan, and he's very kindly agreed to come along tonight and help introduce and answer questions as well. So hopefully that's okay, and we'll do a bit of a double act in terms of
Mhm.
presenting. Okay, thank you. So just firstly, an apology on my part, because I've noticed on rereading the report that there's a couple of incorrect dates in there. So just for the record, the date in paragraph 1 should say November 2022, which is when the economic strategy was adopted, not 2023. And in paragraph 11, the date should be 2024, not 2023. So I was obviously having a bad day with dates on when I was writing this. So apologies for any confusion there. So as the report says, it's a year since the council adopted the economic strategy on behalf of the city, and that was part of a suite of 10-year strategy documents. So it's not just a council strategy, it's a strategy for York, and its implementation is very much meant to be based upon collaborative working rather than it being a work plan for the council in its own right. And the overall aim, members who were involved in the strategy development at the time will remember is really about improving the living standards and the livelihoods for York residents and businesses. And it aims to do that by addressing three things really: by trying to increase productivity within the city, by raising earnings within the city, and also by maintaining our skills advantage. And the strategy sets out 5 strategic themes to achieve those objectives over a 10-year delivery period. So the 5 themes are outlined in the report: York as a global city, a greener economy, thriving workforce, thriving businesses, and then an economy that's powered by good business. So the report, which members will have seen, provides a high-level summary of the work that's been undertaken underneath each of those themes. That's set out at paragraph 8. And then there's more detail on activity and associated data set out in the presentation at Appendix A, slides 12 to 22. And that's a presentation that we recently did to the Economic Partnership, who are the group that the independent advisory group who oversee the economic strategy. So hopefully members, from what they've seen, will be able to recognise that there's been some good progress made over the last 12 months against all the strategy themes, albeit recognising that we're obviously only in year 1 of 10. So you know, it's a continuing approach to that. Now, I don't intend to run through all the details of that presentation now, because obviously, as you said, members will hopefully have read that, but obviously more than happy to take questions on that at the end. And if you want me to cover more detail in due course, then I can do. But I just really want to take the opportunity just to say a couple of other things, really. So obviously quite important background context to the economic strategy is remembering that the council only have a small economic development budget. So we have about £240,000 a year, which is essentially a salary budget that supports the small staff team that we have, which is around 7 staff in total. And those salaries are supplemented by external funding as well. So the delivery of economic activity within the strategy is therefore largely reliant on securing external funding to deliver specific programmes and projects, but also ensuring that we maximise our collaboration with partners and stakeholders, you know, and deliver things together rather than just seeing it as the council's job to deliver the strategy. So as you've hopefully seen through the report, our main source of delivery funding currently is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, for which we're halfway through implementing a 3-year investment of just over £5 million, which covers 3 themes of people and skills, supporting local businesses and communities and place. And you'll have seen several references to the activity that's being done in the slides at Appendix A, and it kind of underpins that how critical that is as a delivery kind of mechanism for us currently. Obviously, Chair, you've also already mentioned the creation of the combined authority, which is coming up, and that will be an important change for potential future funding that's available to support economic growth across both York and North Yorkshire. And as you say, we're scheduled to come back to scrutiny, hopefully in the new year, to bring that emerging economic framework for the MCA, which will be an interesting thing to look at alongside our own economic strategy. And then that need to work collaboratively that I've talked about, obviously that's been recognised through the creation of an economic partnership. And again, in the report, we mentioned that the partnership have recently agreed to move to a task and finish approach, and that's really about groups being set up around each of the main themes within the strategy, as well as a separate task and finish group linked to our city centre vision that was recently agreed by executive last month. So it's really, as I say, looking at prioritisation in collaboration with other groups and stakeholders, and making sure that we're using our limited resources to get the best bang for our buck, I suppose. So that's kind of the introduction on the economic strategy side. And then obviously the second reason for bringing the report today is really to share the emerging York tourism strategy with Scrutiny ahead of a report to executive in the new year, where we'll be asking executive to adopt the strategy on behalf of the city, like they did with the economic strategy. And as I say, very grateful to Brendan for coming along tonight to support on this item. And if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just pass to Brendan briefly to introduce that section, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Of course.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine. And hello, it's great to be here. So I'm Brendan Paddison. I'm Associate Dean in the Business School at York St John University. So that's my full-time job, but also Chair of the Tourism Advisory Board for York. I think it might be helpful to kind of give you a bit of context to the Tourism Advisory Board before then I then talk about the strategy. So the board was relaunched in December 2020. There was a similar group that met as part of the Visit York organisation. But then the board was relaunched in December 2020, represents approximately around 40 stakeholders and industry representatives from the tourism and hospitality sector, both in York, but also the wider region as well. We also have representation from Make It York, York Bid, elected council members and council officers, alongside key hospitality and tourism organisations in the city. When the board was first relaunched, the primary focus was on collaboration with regards to the recovery from the pandemic and making sure that the industry was working collaboratively in that post-COVID recovery, and that the city was safe to welcome visitors and residents back into tourism businesses in the city. With its longer term remit was to help shape a long-term tourism strategy for York, and that work has been ongoing now for almost 2 years, and we're at this point where we have this full draft of a tourism strategy. The strategy has been informed by quite extensive consultation. So back in 2019, 2020, Group Now were commissioned by Make It York to lead on extensive consultation with regards to the future of tourism and what that might mean for York and its tourism sector. So extensive consultation took place with industry leaders, workshops with key stakeholders and resident groups as well, and of course with the tourism advisory boards. They were involved in that consultation, and the Group Now report identified several key themes and recommendations that we then used as a board to inform the development of the strategy. So we initially identified 6 key themes that we worked on as a group and shaped over the course of the last 2 years. Those themes have been refined down to kind of 5 key priority areas that are included in the strategy. And we've taken that on a tour really around the city and the region, making sure that it has had extensive consultation from a range of stakeholder groups across the city and other key sectors. So, for example, the Culture Forum fed back quite extensively on the tourism strategy as part of that extensive consultation. As a group, we meet monthly. We alternate between in-person and online meetings, and the format of those meetings varies in terms of kind of sector snapshot, so we get a sense of what's happening in the city across the sector, and alerting Make It York council officers, York Bid, to kind of the key issues or challenges or opportunities that are emerging in the sector, but also supporting and consulting on kind of key marketing initiatives that Make It York are organising, for example. So the strategy that you have in front of you has been through many iterations, and as a group, the Tourism Advisory Board kind of signed that off in our November meeting. And we've identified 5 key priority areas for tourism in the city. So they are a regenerative visitor economy, green York, culture, and that links very closely with the York culture strategy, residents and localhood, and skills and recruitment. And as I say, this has been a very collaborative approach in developing this, making sure there's been quite extensive feedback and consultation on the strategy, but also making sure that it links to other key strategies that are either in progress or being developed in the city. So, for example, aligning it with the economic strategy as well. It's not a council plan, it's not a Make It York plan, it is a tourism strategy for the city. And the Tourism Advisory Board's role will be making sure that this is implemented and progress is monitored as part of the implementation of the strategy. It's also informed the recent LVEP application, and it's been quite positively received by Visit England as part of that. So really here today to kind of seek your views on the current version, with an aim to kind of have this signed off early in the new year, to then launch this and start implementing towards some of these actions. So I hope that's covered.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, both, and welcome, Councillor Kilbane.
Apologies for my late arrival. I'm fresh out of another meeting. Such are the joys of being a councillor.
Appreciate you rushing to be here. So thanks for that sort of opening spiel, as it were. Much appreciated. I've got various questions on both the economy side and the tourism side, but I'm open to see if any other members want to go first. Councillor Jane Burton.
Right. I've read through it all, and I noticed a couple of mentions about disability, but not a great deal, to be honest. Hotels, it doesn't talk about inclusive hotels. For instance, the IHG group has hotels that have ceiling hoists for visitors who need those. That's just, I mean, there may be more by now, but they were a trailblazer about 20 years ago with that sort of thing. So I think maybe something to mention in planning. It talks about accessible transport and infrastructure, alternatives to car, and it's like, I'm sorry, I have to say this every meeting. What about people who can't use that transport? It's not in here. There's inclusive culture. It's not very inclusive if you can't get into the city centre. And then it also says on page 26, because I had a message from them, York Disability Rights Forum are going to be consulted. They haven't been consulted, apparently, and they're not very happy that they're mentioned in this document, because this is happening quite often with disability groups in York. They're one of the main groups, and people keep putting them in reports, and they've not actually been consulted on this document. It says you're going to consult them, but they might not want to tell you anything. So I don't think you should use them until you've asked. And I think it'd be really good to ask them first before the document's written. And I'm sorry, but it's just getting a bit tedious, and I'm sure you're all fed up of me going on.
Councillor Burton, if I may, never apologise for any of that, and keep banging on about it for as long as you need to. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
It's,
Sorry.
you know, tourism in York. I have, before becoming a councillor, I worked in London, but lived in York, and everyone said to me, why don't you move to London? You've so many friends here. And it's true, I did. I said, yeah, but York's perfect. This is before the pandemic, mind you. Why don't you come and visit? They came to visit and they thought it was a wonderful city to visit because it's very flat. It was very accessible and very easy to get in and out of. You know, that Purple Pound is worth a lot of money. There's no mention of it here. And there has to be. We have to be an inclusive city. We're doing all this York Central thing, trying to attract big business to York. And it just suddenly clicked with me last night. I've been working with huge firms in the City of London who are desperate to be inclusive, incorporate D&I into their businesses, a lot of law firms, massive law firms, Clifford Chance, they've got so many really progressive policies for incorporating, having disabled people working there and going through their career structure and to the top. But not all disabled people are poor. There are an awful lot of disabled people who are poor, but not all of them are. Let's attract some of them here. We won't get these big businesses that we want in York Central unless we're truly inclusive. Because big businesses now demand people that they work with can show how inclusive they are. And I've been working in this sort of area for more than 10 years, but not in York. And it's really sad to see we're so far behind here in York. And we've got to do this better. We can't afford not to, because we became a place that wasn't a place to go to amongst the disabled community of late. We could make this a great place to visit. There are plenty of places where you can park near museums. You used to be able to park outside the art gallery. It might not look as nice with a car there, but it's a lot easier if you want to visit. So there enters the sermon for the time being, but it's just it's so glaringly obvious and it's so missing. Have you got somebody on your board who's disabled, for instance? If not, get somebody, please. Because York's great. I'm born and brought up in York. I love York. I'm selling York all the time.
Thanks for that, Councillor Burton. Again, never apologise for making those representations. There's a lot in that sort of contribution, and I think we'd welcome a response to it in a general sense. But I think two specifics I'd like direct comments on would be this point from the Disability Rights Forum, who said that they haven't been consulted. And that could be something that's just got lost in the pipeline, but it'd be good to know more about that. And this question about board representation too, but still the general other points, it'd be good to have a response on that. One positive is this is yet to be formally signed off, so there's still time. So yeah, if you can, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I can start, and then probably Brendan will want to come in on the detail, because he's much closer to the board and the document. But I think, yeah, absolutely great points, which we will take on board. And I think from my point of view, I suppose it's just making the distinction between, obviously, this agenda needs to be fed back and reflected in the tourism strategy, but it's equally important about the interface with our other strategies and our other work programs, which is obviously the broader agenda that my team are working across, and obviously Pete's portfolio as well. So how we incorporate that into the city centre work we're doing, for example, which, as you know, we're already starting to relook at kind of the each principles for all of our work, including the Our City Centre vision. We've now gone back through that. So I think it's probably it's not an excuse by any means, but some of this work is probably several years old now, and it's just coming to the fore. And I think, the work we're now doing with the new administration is very much bringing this agenda to the fore, and we'll make sure that in our work with partners that's getting followed through as well. So is there anything you wanted to add, Brendan?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I completely agree with all the points that you've made, and you're absolutely right. In terms of kind of board representation, that's one thing we have reflected upon ourselves as a group, to make sure that we have got those diverse voices on the board. And at the moment, in some place that is lacking. And we know that we need to increase our membership to ensure that we are hearing from a range of voices across the city. And certainly forums such as the forums that you mentioned are absolutely vital voices to be heard, and we will look to be, to work with those key organisations, make sure those voices are heard, and their input into the tourism strategy is also important and sought after. So yeah, we will look to kind of make sure those voices are included and their thoughts and feedback is part of the ongoing development of the strategy.
No, I think you said you were from York University. I know Alice Maynard. You're not from York University. Sorry. I misheard.
York
that.
St John.
Oh, right.
York St John
Okay.
University.
I was just thinking York University have taken on Alice Maynard, who's a well-known disability rights campaigner. I think on the council, or she's. I used to work for her sister as well, who's a disabled sister. We've got the people are starting to get with it and get people on boards in the city. We've got to do that too. And I think apart from that, I think it's great. It's good. But we've just got to bring in that inclusivity.
And I think just certainly in the economic strategy, obviously EDI is in there as one of the key principles. But what I'm hearing is that it needs to be a bit louder in the economic strategy, I guess. So definitely take that point. Can I just get a point of clarification, Councillor Burton? So on page 26 of the tourism strategy, you refer to York Disability Rights Forum being cited. So that they're cited as a group that the people working in tourism delivering the strategy need to talk to. So it's a recommendation in action that they should talk to them along with York Pride and IAR UK. Are you saying that York Disability Rights Forum want their name taken out of this document until such a time as they've been consulted about how we move things forward for tourism? Okay,
Yeah.
you take that, Brenda. Yeah.
But keep it in if you come and talk to them.
No, but it's a recommendation as to what to do in the future.
Yeah, it's just that it gives it. There's been a bit of a tendency, put it like that, to consult, but then not listen and do whatever.
This document isn't
So-
saying that we've
No, I
consulted
know
with
it,
them.
I
It's
know
saying
it,
we will
Jason.
consult
I
with them in
know,
the future.
I know.
Are you saying that and we're naming them as an organisation that we will consult with? Are you saying you want their name taken out until
Yes,
such a
that's
time
what they've let
as
me
we have?
know.
Okay,
Yes.
we can take them out.
But it's not to say they
paragraph?
don't want to be consulted.
Oh no, of course not.
It's
of course not.
just, there's this tendency to make it look as if they have, although this doesn't do that. But yeah,
Oh,
and I
okay,
was
thanks.
messaged about that.
Thank you all. Councillor Rose, is it supplementary? Fire away.
I guess one quick point on that is worth checking with them before you take their name out and directly and seeing if there's anything else we can do. But following up on the point that was made around known challenges around inclusivity and gaps in the board, before we get into other comments around other areas, could you spell some of those out in terms of where you feel there might have been a lack of representation, which groups you've engaged to try and plug that gap, if that's okay? Because obviously you're never going to be perfect on representation, but that doesn't mean there aren't groups and experts you can call on.
Yeah, thank you. I think the groups we've highlighted just now, so Disability Rights Forum, for example, would be a group that we want to make sure we got that representation from. And there's other diverse voices, so children, young people in the city as well. Those voices aren't represented on the Tourism Advisory Board. So the two areas in particular we've identified as being important in ensuring that we've got that representation from within the sector, but beyond the tourism and hospitality sector as well.
Was there any group that you did engage in to try and make sure that there was representation before it was then drafted into the strategy?
I think as part of the consultation, and particularly what the group now did back in 2019, 2020, they met with a range of groups from across the city, including resident groups, resident representation there as well, through elected members and the representation that they provide through their roles. So that initial consultation took place through the Group Now report. What we need to make sure is that when we're implementing the strategy, those voices are heard as part of those working groups and making sure that the actions, recommendations and plans that come out of this are also informing the decisions and those plans.
Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft, I've got you, Councillor Fenton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Related to the tourism strategy, obviously there are a large number of people in York who are employed by the tourism industry. Now, this can vary amongst the different groups and what kind of hours and capacity of their work. But I think it is fair to say that in more than other sectors, tends to be lower wage, tends to be more late nights working, things like that. You may be aware that in the previous council, in September, in the full council, in September, we passed as a council a motion on behalf of Get Me Home Safely, which is a campaign that ensures that individuals that work in tourism sectors that have to work late at night and that have to walk home often in dark, particularly on nights like these, would be protected, and encouraging businesses to make sure they take the necessary steps to make sure they've got the appropriate transport and that they're safe on their way home. Not a great deal, I understand, attached to the current strategy in that particular capacity. And we need to remember that whilst it is fantastic that tourists come here and regularly visit, we need to make sure the people who live here in York, who we represent, who work in those tourism areas, are protected first and foremost, because there have been instances of tourism becoming a slightly dangerous thing for people to do if we have visitors who like to come, perhaps. If there's more people basically in an area than the capacity is meant to be, then capacity for danger does definitely increase. So I'd just like to know if there's anything in particular you've done about protecting workers in the tourism sector, and whether there's anything further that can be added to the strategy in that capacity.
Thank you. I think that's a really really valuable point, and one that we can certainly look to make sure that's included as part of the strategy as well. We do, as a group, have representation from North Yorkshire Police, who kind of feeding and we're feeding back in terms of any concerns that are raised as a group. But absolutely, I think you're absolutely right. It's a really valid point, and something we can build into both the local hood aspect, but also the skills and recruitment, and making sure that we are supporting people who work in the sector. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Whitcroft. It's quite helpful actually, because one of the things I was going to raise was in the skills and recruitment section. I thought the recommendations and actions with respect sort of didn't feel overly tangible. And there's one or two bits in there, but a lot of the content in those bullet points I thought were almost sort of communications points. You know, promotion, engagement, that kind of thing. So something around the lines that Councillor Whitcroft mentioned would be a meaningful addition there, I think. Anyway, I've made a note of it. Councillor Fenton, I've got you. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the update on the economic strategy. There's mention made of the Good Business Charter, and it's good to see that work is moving forward. I just wondered if you could sort of set out what the kind of aim is in terms of promotion of the business charter, and perhaps what kind of obstacles you've encountered in terms of if there are businesses that are sort of reluctant to sign up, and what if anything we can do as a council to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously this fits under the economy powered by good business theme, so it is a high priority for us. And I think what we're keen to do is move to a very, as I said, task orientated approach. So what we're planning to do in January as the kind of our first task under that theme is to hold a kind of an awareness raising workshop for businesses, which we'll hold here at the council offices, and really try to help understand what their challenges are in signing up, just as you've said, because I think that's probably where we don't have the information that we need to address that. So is it just one particular area? I think what we find is that people can easily sign up to certain bits of it, but then they've got challenges around other bits, which prevents them from becoming a member of the Good Business Charter. So understanding that detail, as you've suggested, is something that we've identified as our first priority. And as I say, there'll be a workshop in January, which we hope will be an opportunity to engage with people, both who are involved in it, but who aren't, and understand why they aren't, and whether there's anything we can help in terms of addressing those challenges for them. So I think it's a really good question, and certainly the way that our thinking's developing as well. So we can certainly update you on that later after that session.
And hopefully, and I'm saying hopefully, this will be one of the issues picked up by the Task and Finish group around good business. But I'm saying hopefully because it's up to the Task and Finish group what topics they decide to pick up and run with. I mean, obviously we'll encourage and we'll be doing work around this ourselves anyway, but hopefully it'll be those businesses, because businesses are more likely to be persuaded by other businesses than the council, regardless of how persuasive and believable we obviously are. You tend to take business advice from other businesses. So hopefully that will become generative within that group. So it'll be peer-to-peer recruitment will be going on, rather than us telling them it's a good thing to do. That might be more persuasive. I don't know, might not.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna be a bit cheekier for me and bump Councillor Stewart up the list because I know he's got to leave partway through tonight. I've got a long queue of members. You will all get your chance, but Councillor Stewart, fire away.
Thank you very much, Chair. No, Councillor Webb is looking to cut some key funding in my ward, so I've got to be an alternative meeting. But no, I'll be a bit sort of more critical and probing if I can, which is that on the economic strategy, I suppose the big thing I've got is that if Councillor Kilbane didn't fill the potholes wouldn't get filled. If whichever it is didn't empty the bins wouldn't, we know what I mean about bins anyway. But on the economic strategy, I don't get the bits that we're influencing, you know, to be really harsh. And it's not just this year, it's all the years. I mean, this report, which is the update report, talks about something going back to 2005. And I'm not seeing the bits that if the council wasn't here, wouldn't happen. So to explain to a resident, you know, what the council has done, what the council has added to the economy, I'm really not getting it. And on the tourism strategy, it's good, but I would say it's too broad. And I appreciate, you know, say it's a high level document. But for me, if I worked in tourism, I would read this report and there wouldn't be anything in this report that I would think, oh, yikes, that's a bit controversial. So I think we just covered every single aspect of anything related to tourism, rather than what I would say it's about saying these are the particular points we need to major on. So we've got things like UNESCO Media City, which we quote every time. As far as I'm aware, there's been no tangible cost benefit analysis of that sort of thing. You know, I'm not saying anybody should be left out. And, you know, I agree with Councillor Burton's points about disability and everything like that. But it just seems that we cover absolutely everything. You know, it was not the tangible things about this welfare. In particular, we've got stuff in this document about the issue of wages, and you know the administration wants to increase average wages, particularly for residents, and I just don't see how that's happening. You know, we just cover everything. So there's my quite harsh, but you know, for us to scrutinise comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Shall I start, Brendan, and then yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you treat it as a question and
Yeah.
Have I harshly slammed the documents or not?
So I suppose the starting point is the fact that this is it's an ambitious economic strategy for the city, and as I said, the council's part in delivering that is just a relatively small part. And you know, that's why I talked about kind of the funding that we put into economic development, because actually it's 240 grand a year, which doesn't get us very much in terms of staff time. So we've got a small team whose role is very much focused on or was focused on pulling the strategies together, identifying where we felt that a strategic approach to the economy could make a bigger difference over a longer period of time. So as opposed to something like collecting bins and being able to count how many bins you've missed in a week, it is the nature of economic development is that it's more difficult to quantify impact in a short-term situation, because actually the work that's being done is actually influencing macroeconomic changes. So, you know, you don't actually always get the impact until 5 years or 10 years down the line. So I think
on that point, obviously the council's been involved in this area for a long time. So which are the main macroeconomic changes in York that City of York Council has influenced, please?
Well, I suppose the other point is that the economy of York is performing well at the moment. It's performed well through COVID, and you know, in terms of a city, it's performing well in comparison to other cities that have suffered more through COVID. So we've got lots of stats about how the economy is performing. What we can't show, I suppose, the direct link between what the council has done and how that performance has been good compared to whether it would have been worse if we hadn't been doing this. But that's a broader point. I mean, I suppose where the influence is, as I kind of suggested in my introduction, is around the drawing down of funding to then spend on programs and projects. So you know, work around the SPF investment plan, which was done by the economic team, in terms of making sure that delivers the outputs and outcomes, and those will be quantifiable outputs and outcomes, and we can share kind of the progress on those with you if you'd be interested, in terms of where we're up to today in number of businesses supported, you know, amount of investment generated, amount of regeneration delivered, etc., etc. So programs tend to be very specific in terms of what outcomes and outputs we need to deliver for funding, and that's when it's easier to demonstrate. I think it's more difficult to demonstrate across the whole strategy after 1 year of implementation. Did you want to add anything on that, Pete?
Can do, yeah. I can come in now. I think, Councillor Stewart, if you look in the pack from pages 26 to 35, you'll see some examples of where the council has spent some money that's intervened to provide support or kickstart things or help businesses grow and thrive. And I've got to say that most of the money that's been spent recently has come from the UK SPF funds. So that's, I always forget, it's the Shared Prosperity Fund, which, if you like, is York's Brexit bonus. That's not something you hear Labour politicians say very often, and had to raise some eyebrows around the table, I see. But essentially, prior to Brexit, York got very little European funding, got some, but not a lot. But as part of levelling up, we do get a share of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund that has come our way, and that we have reinvested from the Conservative government, that we have reinvested locally into various schemes that support businesses. And the next stage of that will be around the skills agenda. So as well as the tangible things that are in the report in front of you, there'll also be things happening like green skills colleges and all that kind of business going on. So that's happening, and it's being done by a team that's very small, you know, £260,000 a year for the economic. They work wonders with off a very small budget, and you know, multiply their investment considerably. And I'm sure we can give you all the stats on that. But I think it's also very important to remember that what the council's job is to be an enabler. And I think, you know, it's a fair criticism, Councillor Stewart. I don't think the council has done that much economically over the past 8 years. I would tend to agree with you on that. But we're in authority now, and we intend to make sure that things start happening. And the enthusiasm, the energy that's been around the economic partnership, for example, when we got those people together, when we got city leaders together, people who want to make things happen. And I think the council's job is to act as a convener in a lot of these respects, bring those people together, make sure the pathways are clear, and then to get the hell out of the way quite often and let the people who want to get on with it. And we're seeing that both within the sort of the economic partnership enthusiasm that's around that, but the sort of digital media stuff that we're all getting very excited about. So in terms of digital media, you can take, we're building a pathway for somebody that's got might not be academically minded, but was really good at video games. And we're trying to build a pathway for them into digital media arts. That means they can be on £50,000 a year jobs as sort of standard. So, you know, decent jobs for decent wages for local people. So, you know, that's what we are about, and that's what we're doing. Some of it's been achieved. Not everything works. Some things work, some things don't. But you know, we are prepared to be in there and be the you know, the people that can enable things and encourage things to happen. And we've had a pretty good reception from business on that in the last in the last few months, mainly down to the work that the team has done.
Thanks.
I'm not sure where I gave the 8-year time frame in my question, but I'll look forward to seeing Robert pick the tangibles out of that answer of what has been caused.
If we can try and move through the list, we've got a lot of people waiting. Councillor, sorry, did someone want
Well, I presume I hear something about the tourism strategy, but that was
sorry?
tourism strategy, was that?
Oh, you have another question?
No, I asked about the tourism strategy and feeling it was too broad, but
I mean, ask that question again and with brevity and we can hopefully get a response on it. I think Councillor Stewart, there was so much within that discussion, some of it has been a bit lost, but if you feel you have a specific question that hasn't yet been covered, go now because you know, I know you have to leave, that's all.
thanks, Chair. Well, it was just about the tourism strategy, Brendan. Obviously, I think that it is so broad, it doesn't have anything that, you know, would in any way be controversial in terms of the tangible detail and things like that. So I think you've got to, you know, for me, if you're working in the tourism sector, you should read this sort of thing and just, you know, raise a few eyebrows in terms of people might think that's less than ideal. So you're obviously going to say it's a high level strategy, but you know, again, it's just, are there not things we should be majoring on? Is there not, shouldn't it be more controversial by definition of omelettes and egg breaking and that sort of thing, really?
Thank you. I mean, I think the strategy has been developed by those who work in the tourism sector. So I like to think that they would recognise and align themselves with a lot of what you would see in this document. It is a 10-year strategy and there are a number of key ambitions there. And from this will come more specific detailed plans and action points to enable us to deliver on what we've set out as part of our 5 key priorities.
And if I can just come in, Chair, I will be brief, honestly. I mean, I agree with you, Councillor Stewart. I'd like to see more tangible deliverables in it, and sort of, you know, KSIs, and you say, you know, this is what we're going to do by this, that, and this is why. But that's when you co-produce things, then you have to cede control, and it has been developed by people who work in the sector, and this is the final produce of that. And we have to kind of say, okay, it's your strategy. We'll all we've had an input into it, but we'll all work to it.
Thank you. Councillor Rose, you've been patient with the supplementary.
That's right, yes. Asking my version of the same question, which is, I disagree about the fact that there aren't areas of council influence in here. There are decisions and funding, and I don't necessarily think it's too wide. But what I do agree with on that is that some of this is more policy level than strategy level. There's a bit of a, this is what we like to see rather than any form of plan. I don't want to get too detailed into the action plan, but to what extent there could be a bit more of strategic intent fleshed out beyond just sort of broader recommendations, and turning it into a question that hopefully sort of echoes that. If you're a resident or a councillor reading this or engaging with this, not necessarily this particular document, how can you tell what the council's doing and how can you tell what the council's aspirationally hoping other organisations do by vaguely looking at us for leadership? How can we tell which bits of this is, you know, for the council to own?
Is that specific on the tourism strategy or both?
It is the tourism
Yeah,
strategy
okay,
and
just to
how
clarify.
you can tell which bits of it are just the city will
Yeah.
and how bits are the council's going to do something strategic intentionally.
Yeah, I think that's all still to be determined once we have once the document has been kind of approved. It's then for the Tourism Advisory Board to work with those key organisations across the city to ensure that and keep them accountable as well as a group, to ensure that we are working towards kind of clear action plans and key targets for this 10-year plan.
I suppose it links to the Make It York SLA as well, specifically because the Make It York are the council's tourism arm. Essentially, that's where the resources sit to deliver the council's element of this rather than in-house. So I know there's ongoing work to ensure that the SLA is aligned with things like our city centre vision and the economic strategy, tourism strategy, etc. So that will come through those discussions as well, I think.
I do have other substantive questions later, but I guess I would encourage more detail around the strategy, and I think there's a little bit too much policy level in that.
We'll try and come back to you later.
I mean, I think I mean, as I said, you know, to our absent friends, that I would like to see more deliverables in terms of targets in there, and I think that is something that we could pick up with Make It York. It's not something that we can or would seek to impose upon our partners. You know, they're contributing what they can and what they want. But you know, what gets measured gets done it. So it'd be good to see some of those deliverables. We can pick that up separately with Make It York, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Whitcroft, did you have a supplementary? Or has it gone?
No, separate question, Chair.
Okay, cool. Appreciate colleagues' patience with me here. It's great that you're all chomping at the bit. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to both of these, I'd like to draw out the work being done on inclusive growth and on vocational training, particularly with the tourism strategy. The perception of the industry has been problematic over the decades, let's say, and it was certainly raised at the summit at the racecourse in terms of the industry recognizing that it needed to look or demonstrate the career opportunities, and not going back to the 1990s, where the relationship between the council and the tourist industry was very poor. I remember a rather stormy meeting above the gas showrooms when 1994, there was the start of the conversation. But I think it's about both looking from the perspective of a local resident, say, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to my children? And importantly, for the tourist strategy, I just have a look at it from the perspective of how do you demonstrate to residents that they benefit from being in a city that has so many tourists come to it, and those activities and opportunities, but it's constantly reminding them of that. Just a very brief plug that I don't see reference to the mystery plays, which are one of the York USPs in terms of why come to this part of the city and of the country. And I think it was also worth looking at the aftermath of Welcome to Yorkshire. It's something I did worry about in terms of York had to maintain its objectives and to ensure that the York tourist economy was not damaged by the lack of direction at a regional level, because it is so important to us. Thank you, Chair.
I think just on that latter point, we probably haven't touched on it much tonight, but there's the LVEP, which is the Local Visitor Economy Partnership, and we've recently had confirmation through Visit England that York and North Yorkshire have now got LVEP status. So whilst it's not a new welcome to Yorkshire, it's kind of a sub-regional partnership that we will be a key partner in. It's actually North Yorkshire Council that will be the accountable body for that status, but we as York City Council will have kind of equal rights on that partnership board, and the mayoral combined authority will also be involved in that when it comes into creation. So I think that's an important kind of next step with tourism, and as part of that, it's very, very important that York has its own strategy, I suppose, defined. North Yorkshire are in the same process, trying to kind of finalise their what they're calling their destination management plan, which in all senses is a very similar type of strategy, isn't it? And then coming together, it's very much part of the LVEP agreement that we have an action focused discussion then when we come up with a year one action plan for what we're going to do in terms of working jointly together to kind of deliver those tourism strategies, both locally but also adding value, hopefully by working closer together with North Yorkshire. So just wanted to kind of bring that into the discussion as well, because there is change afoot there. It doesn't necessarily bring money at this stage, it's a status, but it does put us in a position to be able to bid for future monies now that we've got the status. So
just to really thank you for your comments and feedback there. I think you made some really valuable points, particularly around that perspective of the sector in terms of employability, and making sure that from a resident perspective, that's really clearly articulated as well. So thank you very much. We'll make sure that feedback is incorporated into the revised document.
And I think, you know, it can't be seen in isolation. So, you know, all the economic strategy is about good business, etc., and that tourist businesses as much as any other business. I think from when we were in opposition, we were banging on at Make It York to make sure that every event that they put on would appeal to locals as much as tourists, and why wouldn't it? You know, and now that we're in administration, it's exactly the same message. And I think Make It York are responding, and you know, I think we've seen a massive improvement in the Christmas markets this year. For example, it's not had as much negativity as we've had in previous years. In fact, I've hardly picked up any at all this year, to be honest. But and I think, you know, what gets missed is that the majority of people who visit Christmas markets, that, you know, think it's just for the tourists. Actually, the majority of people who visit the markets are from York, you know, who go into that space, and we need to. I think we do need to get that message that we have lots of stuff going on in the city. I think there could be more stuff going on, and it could be more interesting, and it could be more culturally vibrant, and hopefully the tourism strategy will assist with that. But these things are for York residents too. They're not just as a visitor attraction. So for example, if we were to repurpose Castle Car Park into a space that could be used all year round for events and festivities, or a park or something like that, then that's entirely for locals to come in and use and play with their kids and enjoy the space and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's done in part because we are a tourist city that also wants to that attracts 8 million people it is a year, and we have to keep on creating spaces that they'll be interested in, and that they'll enjoy to keep on coming and spending their money in York, which we're very pleased that they do. We have to get the balance right, though, and that's the job, I think, and that's where the residents and localhood part of the strategy starts to talk, and the cultural part of the strategy starts to talk. We do have to get the balance right so that people feel ownership of their own city. And we know, as politicians who knock on people's doors, that quite often people don't feel ownership of their own city, and we have to get that. We have to do something about that, because, you know, it is by and large, it's a great city. And it's a great city to go and visit, and we need to make sure that our residents enjoy it as much as the tourists.
Here, Councillor Kilbane.
Sorry.
Remind everyone to try. Could we just remind everyone to try and keep our answers a little bit more succinct?
If I may, on that, Councillor Healy, because I seem to be sensing more fidgeting than normal this evening. What I would say is, it's not even 6:30 yet. There's only one main agenda item that we're looking at tonight. If there was another 2 or 3, or even 1 or 2, I'd be a bit more on edge about timings. But so far, I think we're doing okay. But yeah, I mean, as ever, let's all try and exercise brevity. But I don't think we're that bad at the minute. We've had far worse meetings, and we will have in the future. But yeah, if it worsens, shout up. But next on my list was Councillor Hook, and then we'll come to Councillor Healy's really succinct contribution.
Plural.
I've got 2 questions that are more technical, so therefore they've probably answered quite quickly. The first one on the economy is gross value added, because it's obviously a very important number, because you use it to calculate productivity, or to reflect productivity. And I was just wondering how that was calculated, because there's a lot of big people who work that don't really have the value. You know there's a value, but you don't know what it is. So, like, do you monetize the national health people? Do you monetize the people who work for the council when we're not getting any income in? How do you do it? And do you deduct the people's salaries for gross, or do you just do the net? That's the one on that one. If you want to answer that, and I'll move on to my second one, which is, or do I go on to both?
It's a very quick answer, because I don't know the technical detail of that. Essentially, it comes through something called the regional econometric model. So it's calculated by a very complex formula, and I don't know the detail of what you've asked, but I will take the question back to the team and see whether anyone, particularly Simon, will probably be able to answer that question.
Yeah,
So
I think
is that
it's-
okay? I'll
that's
take
lovely.
that away.
I think it's the accountant in me. I like to know how these numbers
Yes,
are
yes.
derived, you know. And the other thing is on the tourism one, you mentioned that it's now about a 50-50 split on beds between service beds. So presumably that's the hotels and the proper B&Bs, and then the other ones that are the short-term lets. And obviously the short-term lets, we know from experience, are growing like nobody's. Is that going to, already it's having a bad effect on property prices and local areas as well, but is it also going to adversely impinge on hotel businesses? Could we see our hotels, despite the wonderful tourist sector and the number of visitors, not doing so well because of this rivalry?
It's a really good question, something that we've talked about as a group, mindful of that rise in those numbers and what it means for hoteliers across the city. And it's something that we've tried to address as part of the priority area, particularly around regenerative visitor economy. Potentially it could, I think, if we don't monitor it and look to kind of seek how we can best manage that. But the hope is that by identifying it here, we can kind of work collaboratively to ensure that there's a plan in place and work with key partners to make sure that we address any concerns that might arise with regards to bed space in the city.
So would we need to do some lobbying to try and get the rules changed around it, like for instance planning applications, you know, changing the category or something like that, just work that we could do?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think there's been something done previously on that through council, hasn't there, through a motion to council around kind of short-term lets and things. So yeah, I think we've got that as an action to look at within the planning powers. And as you say, it's an influencing role rather than something that's within our immediate gift, but we can continue to do that, definitely. Thank you.
Yes, that's right.
Councillor B. Burton.
Yeah, just to supplement on that one. So at the moment, we don't have many powers to control short-term lets. So obviously places like Whitby have recently been given those powers, but we don't currently have them. There's been such an explosion in short-term lets, but not, I don't know, has there been such a reduction in, you know, typical hotel accommodation? I guess, you know, obviously the push would be to control that and perhaps reduce the number of short-term lets. But what impact do you see that having on tourist numbers? How is it, if there's growth of short-term lets massively supported tourism, or how is that actually kind of tied together, I guess, from your view as a stakeholder?
It's not something I have specific insight in. I think, you know, in terms of ensuring that there's that kind of diversity in accommodation is important, but it's making sure that that diversity doesn't kind of outweigh the other part of that offer. And I think it's important that as a sector that we keep a close eye on that and what the implications of that might be in terms of moving forward.
And the main issue that's been raised with me from hoteliers is the impact it has on their staff's ability to be able to afford to live anywhere near work because they're pushed out of the York housing market.
Thanks for that. Councillor Rowe, is it definitely supplementary? Yeah?
It is supplementary. You already tackled part of the question, which is talking about affordability and the key part of the council plan with relation to the short-term lets bit. Obviously, part of that is it drives up the cost of housing, and so there's an impact on affordability there. I think we all welcome some better management or some management of short-term lets, but is the risk there that removal of that will drive prices in York sky high for accommodation and then create a challenging environment for affordability for people who want to visit the city?
I think inevitably it's that careful balance, isn't it? You know, when you've got greater supply, then it tends to bring prices down. And certainly that range of prices, you know, we've got a lot of maybe more top end expensive hotels, but this is filling probably a different gap in the demand, isn't it? So take some of that away and it probably would impact, I presume, on visitor numbers and things. But as you say, that then has knock-on implications for local residents in the housing market. So it's all in the mix, isn't it? And you know, I think the real challenge for us is the lack of power to be able to control it anyway, even if we knew what the sweet spot was. The lack of ability to locally control that is not with us at the moment. So yeah, it's a difficult one.
And if you look at planning applications for the last few years, there's been numerous applications for new hotels coming in. So I mean, they all clearly think the market is there. There are additional bed spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I think it's probably worth us as councillors, rather than it being part of this strategy, but having a plan in place for if we do actually manage to control lets, expecting not only an explosion of planning permission requests for housing, but also an expectation of visitors that we do need more capacity in the city for it.
Thanks for that, and thanks for the initial question or questions, Councillor Hook. Next on the list, Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, a supplementary to Councillor Hook's question. If I live in York, but I'm based out of London, does that mean my GVA is counted in London, but my educational qualifications are counted in York?
Again, can I take that away and get you a reply?
Yeah, if you could do. It's
I
just
will
that,
do, yeah, we'll check that
yeah,
if we know the answer.
the two new children in my children's class, both of their parents would be in a similar situation.
Okay.
So it might go some way to explain.
Yeah,
since
it's a really interesting
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Okay, I'll take that away. Thank you.
If
that's
I
first
may, Councillor Healy, is that when you say explain the situation, is that with regards to the decrease in productivity in the last few years for York?
The flatlining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very slight decrease, I think. Yeah, flatlining is probably a bit more generous.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Now it's questions as opposed to huge speeches. Page 3, paragraph 3, you mentioned and a, in quotes, green, close quotes, tourist levy to benefit residents in the hospitality sector. What's a green tourist levy? Oh, do you want to borrow Chris's papers if you don't have a set? It's on the papers that we were given, so it's the agenda papers. Page 3, paragraph 3, second sentence. Yes, that's hence the reason I suggested you might want to use this.
Yeah. Apologies. So, so this is in the council plan, isn't it? So, I think that's the specific wording that was included in the One City for All plan. I'm not quite sure what the green element of that refers to. I don't know whether Pete's close to that, but essentially the discussion around the tourist levy generally was about whether we follow or look at the types of models that have been implemented in some of the other cities like Manchester and Liverpool, where they're essentially charging tourists a certain amount of money per bed space that they rent. So they've £1 on top of their hotel bill, for example, and that bit of the payment comes into a central pot, which is then spent locally to support, you know, cleaning the city or putting tourism activities on. So it's essentially making sure that you capture some of that visitor money and have it to reinvest back into the city. So I assume, I've not been close to the council plan, but I assume the green element of that is maybe looking at if a tourism levy was implemented, could that be used to support the green climate agenda within the city?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just to be absolutely clear, any form of tourist levy would have to be agreed with the hospitality businesses. And we haven't started having those conversations yet, but they would have to be agreed with those businesses because one, it would be voluntary because there's no legislation around it. And two, we would be asking those businesses to collect it and then, you know, assemble it into a central sort of pot. And I'm sure that those businesses would want to know what that money is being spent on and have some control over it. And that's a really very reasonable thing to want to do. what we're saying very clearly in our council plan is that we think any additional monies that are raised should be to try and green tourism, because it is a difficult area to try and get. I mean, if we're trying to increase international visitors, how do you do that in a green way? You know, are we asking them all to come on a boat? You know, there's going to be people flying in. So is it that actually we need to make the journey from the train station to the city centre as good as it possibly can be, so that we're encouraging people to arrive here by train? Are we looking to repurpose spaces such as Castle Car Park as part of a greening agenda, sort of embracing riversides, all that kind of stuff? So our hope for it would be that we would be able to use, if such a thing came about, our hope would be that we would be able to use it to make York achieve its carbon neutral goals, meet that transport agenda, all those kind of things. But that will have to be in discussion with the people that we'll be working with in partnership on such a levy, should it come into existence. And those conversations haven't started yet. But that would be our aspiration.
Okay, so still evolving then.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yep. Can I carry on? Yeah. Page 16. It's a graph on labour productivity, GVA per hour worked. It's very difficult to tell in black and white what's what. So just next time, either put like, you know, York or Leeds or something on it, or put it in a colour or something. I think the same point gets raised on the next graph on point 18. Okay, entering councillor steward territory here. Page 22, renewed focus on UNESCO City and Media Art status. I believe this was brought in under the last Labour administration, 2011, 2015. And at that point, I couldn't clearly articulate to you the costs and benefits of doing this. Being away for 8 years, what has been the costs and benefits of being this only city in the United Kingdom that has this designation?
I mean, I can't really speak for the last 8 years. I'm sure it would have had some impact in terms of it's a designation that only 32, I think, cities have around the world. So it would have marked York out as a place to go to if you're interested in digital and digital media arts. What we looked at this when we came into administration and asked exactly that same question, you know, what is the sort of the cost benefit of having it? And actually in York is a cluster of digital media arts companies. So I don't know if you know, but companies like Viridian FX are based on Swinegate. They do the special effects for House of Dragons, which is a global brand that I'm sure you're very familiar with. So the big players on, you know, doing special effects for blockbuster movies. So within York, there is a substantial cluster already of these companies. They are the companies of the future, as the creativity that digital media arts needs is unlikely to be replaced by AI at the, well, it might do it be at the bottom end, but sort of the top end stuff that we're looking at, it's unlikely to be replaced. You're still going to need that creativity in it, and you'll still be a room for technical skills in there. So we, along with partners across the city who came to us to say, we think we can do this with the UNESCO designation, have supported so far the Reignite programme, which is about reigniting our UNESCO designation to promote York as a place of excellence when it comes to digital media arts, to attract more businesses to come here. And well, again, I don't want to speak out of turn because we need to sit down with these partners and agree formally the way forward. But in the more informal conversations that we've been having, we want to make York the place outside of London that you base yourselves in if you're doing digital media arts. Because it's a lovely place to live, and we've already got a cluster of people working in the industry here. So we think it's got real potential for growth in decently paid jobs that are accessible to people that are not necessarily following an academic path. And there's lots of enthusiasm about it in the city. So we think that the UNESCO designation can bring us a lot in the years to come, and we'll be shouting about it to potential businesses that are thinking of moving here. And I think that whole sort of industry, if you look at, you know, Tracy Brabin's drive for digital media arts in West Yorkshire, and attempts to get film studios up and running and all that kind of stuff. Well, if that happens, then we'll have people here that will be working directly in that industry. So we think it's got legs. We think it's jobs for the future, and that's what we're trying to do with the UNESCO designation now. Can't really speak for the past 10 years, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, sure thing.
Lovely map of the UK. Page 23, you've got a lovely map of the UK in blue and red with highs and lows, but high and low of what? Feel free to come back to us on that one, if it would be easier.
Yeah, I will come back to you on that.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you. At least that one's in colour.
Okay, thank you. Page 25, top line, 88,000 green jobs within York's TTWA. What's a TTWA?
Oh, I know this one.
Oh, good.
Travel to work area. It's essentially the area from which people will travel to a job.
Oh, travel to
Work
area. Oh, okay. 88,000, that's quite a thing. Page 27, lovely graph. Is this the beginning in March 2005 to the end in March 2023, the difference between those two dates?
Yes, it's showing the growth between those dates each year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if, I don't know, let's take manual. So if manual decreases, that means there's been an increase in manual jobs from period to period. So we've increased our manual jobs, for instance, between, I don't know, what's that, probably March 2021 to March 2023. And we've slightly decreased our skills jobs between September 2022 and March 2023. Would that be right?
No, I think that's showing that the bits below zero are showing that it's decreased, aren't they, in manual? So the years where manual has grown is 2018 to 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. So the bits above the zero are the growth areas. The bits below are where the job growth has
So
declined.
over that period, then we've lost a little bit of manual and we've gained a whacking great chunk of high skilled.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Can I ask how many more you have, Councillor?
Not many at all. In fact, that's it. And I believe they were questions.
And can I just say, I thought the graph or the map on page 23 was about tourism visitors, but I could be wrong. But that's what I read.
I don't know. I've got no idea what it is. I couldn't work it out.
I think perhaps does the confusion come from how on the left there's a number of sort of figures which could any one of them could represent the differentiation of colours, but it's not clear which one.
Yeah,
But, you know, we can clarify that later.
I read it as saying that it was probably the 54% up and it's percentage up and down, but it could be any of those numbers that it's a map of and there's no key for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point's been made, you know,
Point well made, yes, and it's good to know everybody's read it, so thank you.
Indeed. Is this a supplementary, Councillor Fenton? I'll add you to the back of the queue, but it's a very short queue now, I can assure you, okay? And a lot of my questions have been covered. Councillor Rose, I've got you here, but you might have masqueraded a main question as a supplementary. Or...
No, I've got about 5 main questions, but I'll pick one of them off the list and you can stick me to the end for the others. And thanks for taking all of my questions on the economic strategy progress update. So they're all about the tourism strategy. Picking one of them, so I entirely agree with you, Angela, on the point around the mystery plays being missing. I think there are a number of other similar events and organisations and areas that are missing, including the proms, tea rooms, the National Rail Museum is just a picture. But I think the biggest gap for me in terms of sector is that there's not really any mention of drinking whatsoever, or the drinking sector in there. So drinks, pubs, cocktails, stag nights, hen nights. I get why we might want to not talk about it. It feels like maybe we should have a strategy for it, and it should be referenced in the doc. It mentions in passing on page 48 day breaks, including restaurants. I don't think that kind of covers it. So I guess, is that something that can be put into the strategy? Is there anything in there that I'm missing? That's my question.
Well, can I just jump in on that and add to it? Was that a conscious thing to not talk about the drinks economy, or however else people might describe it?
So in terms of the evening economy, we do talk about the evening economy, making sure it's safe, and we draw attention to the York's purple flag status. And that's certainly part of a number of our key priorities that we've identified. We've not specifically drawn attention to stag and hen parties as such, for obvious reasons, but rather make sure that we can ensure that York's evening economy is a safe and vibrant place to visit, for a diversity of visitors that would want to come to the city.
Yeah, I guess I think it probably is worth putting more into it. It also mentions it in reference to kind of hospitality jobs. So there's some stuff in there, but it's not about, do we want to increase these numbers? Do we want to change the way that we approach it? Is there something we should be talking about in terms of planning for where that lies? And it references race events, but it doesn't reference that aspect of them. And so it feels like that needs fleshing out somewhat.
Councillor Waller, supplementary. I'm sorry,
I can
Councillor
just say,
Cobain?
in
Okay,
terms of the attractions that are or aren't mentioned, I do need to say, this is it's a tourism strategy. It's not an advertising brochure. It's it is an overall strategy. And if you start mentioning one attraction, then I can see where that would end up. So
Yeah, fair point. Anyway, any others on your list that you
I've
really
got a
want?
related point, but it's in a separate question, so I'll leave it for now.
Fair play. Thanks, Councillor Rose. Councillor Ben Burton, you were next. It's going back some time.
Yeah,
now,
can
but-
do that. I got two pretty much related questions, if that's all right. So first one mentions York Central in here. That'll be, pretty much acres of new office space and workspace in the city. A lot of that's going to come through the new master developer that comes in. But how does the strategy kind of economic team plan to work with that new master developer, and what's the plan for kind of how we get what we want there?
Yep, really good question. I know I watched Scrutiny last night, which was the York Central update. So obviously members who were here last night will know kind of the major updates on the project. But it's a really good point, because the delivery of office space is obviously key to the financial side of it for the council, because it's all about the enterprise zone status and the retention of business rates. So if we don't get the offices delivered, then that risks the level of business rates coming back into the pot. So this is a really high priority for us. I'll say recently, a year ago, we appointed a head of inward investment, and one of his key jobs is about inward investment onto York Central. So he's in the process of pulling together an inward investment strategy for York Central. We're already discussing that with York Central partners, but obviously the key discussion will be with the developer partner, as you've suggested, that they're the ones with the money and the plan. So we're very keen to get in early doors with them. Obviously members will be doing those discussions initially, but the officer team are kind of very keen to sit down and get behind the detail of that. And obviously the sooner the better in terms of office space coming forward. And the potential government hub is obviously a kind of a first phase potentially if that comes forward. So that will be the start. And actually, if we can secure that government hub, then that is key to the following strategy, because actually they will be an anchor tenant and will act as a catalyst to other businesses who want to supply the government. So yeah.
And I think we spent probably the first 6 months of administration. We have been able to get on and do some things, but quite a lot of the work we've been doing is background work. And actually to have all these strategies coming into play now is really useful when we go into those discussions with the master developer, because we've got behind us very clear principles, whether it's the economic strategy that we're talking to them about, of the kind of investments that we're looking for. Well, that economic strategy was largely worked up by the previous administration. So, you know, it is cross-party, as similarly with the city centre vision, you know, large sections of which will be applicable to York Central. We've got that to sit back on. And when we're talking to the NRM and other attractions that are coming in, we've got the tourism strategy. So we're not kind of sat there in a room with them saying, well, this is what we think. We're saying this is what the city thinks, because this is what the city has told us over a number of years. And these are the strategies that have been developed. And that's what we want to see delivered. Now, you know, it's then up to persuasive skills or whatever to try and make sure that that's what we get. But going into that discussion, I'll call it, rather than negotiation, going into that discussion with them, it's great to have all of these well worked out and well thought through and largely agreed upon strategies to support your position, because it's saying to those people, this is what the city wants.
Thank you. And then the follow-up, I guess, is in terms of inward investment, kind of on York Central, but more broadly. I was looking at a couple of other councils' investment plans today, and Glasgow is a good example where they have a very clear set of industries that they want to support. Obviously, tourism we focus on a lot in York, quite rightly, but they're very clear on kind of like aerospace, things that they have specialism at their university. I guess it's either a point that I think it would be interesting to see us include that in our strategy if we do have things that are important, and publicise those. But I guess otherwise it's a bit of a quick question is, do we have specific areas that we want to be focusing on, and what are those? I guess touching on the universities obviously have a lot of specialisms in York, and how we tie into that.
Yep. So yeah, we do identify kind of 4 key sectors for York. So rail is one, digital and creative that Pete's already talked about is another, bioeconomy is the third, and professional services is the other one. So what we're doing in the team at the moment is working up specific sector development plans for each of those sectors, because what is quite easy to do is identify a broad sector, but what we really need to understand better, and are starting to understand better through the team, is the niches that York has to offer, because a lot of inward investment strategies, if you've looked at a few, will be targeting these same sectors. So what is special about York at a very niche level in those sectors that we can really target our work at and our activity around. So that does link into the universities and the strengths that we've got around research and skills in those areas as well, and how we use those benefits to lever in investment on the back of that. So yeah, a lot of exciting work happening around that actually, and maybe something we could come and talk to you about in more detail further down the line once we've worked up those sector plans, if members are interested.
And I think so they're the areas that have been identified for the best growth that's going to match our ambitions in terms of well-paid jobs and secure jobs and all that. And also we need to make sure that that ties in with North Yorkshire's plans as well, because a lot of the inward investment will be across the region post combined authority and mayoral combined authority. And the reason I was late today was that we were sort of finalising some of the drafts from the economic framework, as well as some other bits, and you know, we were very clear, and we didn't have to, you know, both authorities are very clear that those frameworks now need to come to scrutiny as soon as, so that scrutiny can have meaningful input to them before they're signed off by the relevant combined authority. So and hopefully you'll see that reflected in there. But if you think there's bits that are missing, that we're missing a gaping opportunity or something, then that's, we need to know.
That's important. Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. If I may, just want to double check my list. I've got now Councillor Jane Burton and Councillor Fenton and Councillor Waller. And then depending on how we get on, I might bring you back in, Councillor Rose. But I'm basically covered for my questions, and then we'll come to recommendations if we have any. Is that all right? So Councillor Jane Burton.
A couple of some comments and some questions, couple of questions. So I mentioned earlier about hotels and inclusive hotels, and I had a quick look up, and there are a few, and I can think of some already, but I wondered perhaps this is to Councillor Kilbane. Are we looking to make sure, or can we do that as a city, to make sure that when we're building hotels, that they include a certain number of accessible rooms? Or
I think you're moving out of my area now into sort of, I don't know what the planning laws are around what we can and can't insist on, but certainly, you know, that voice should be heard at that stage while the plans are being drawn up. And certainly that voice should be heard at the planning committees, you know, and that should form part of officer recommendations and decisions by committee members. And, you know, I do wonder, Councillor Burton, if we're at a point where we've had such a bad reputation in terms of access for the past few years, if we, you know, and you've quite rightly pointed out some of the things that are missing here, if we keep focusing on it and keep working on it, wouldn't it be great to get York to the position where it was the #1 choice of destination for people to come because it was so accessible?
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's what we need to be aiming for, and that maybe that's something we need to pick up within the council and influence our partners on that as much as we possibly can.
that would make me very happy, I have to say. And I did look, and even the youth hostel here in York is wheelchair accessible, something to sell as a strategy. And I just also noted down and have been looking up the art gallery, the amazing transformation, wonderfully accessible. Benningborough Hall on the outskirts, it's now, the hall is fully accessible. It's left a couple of £1 million for the transformation, which had to include an accessible lift to all floors of the hall. York Theatre Royal transformation, accessible lifts. Mansion House has got a lift, you know, National Centre for Early Music, it's accessible. We've got so many accessible things, not to mention City Screen, if we could get there, once we get there again. It's the most accessible things are here in York. Let's sell them, really. I also have a question, the last question is about this SP fund or the SPF. Thinking about lifts in places like the Castle Museum. Now, I realise the Castle Museum is a rickety old museum. That's what's wonderful about it. But there must be perhaps rooms that could be made accessible. I know that some of the rooms are not, because I've had complaints from people who've tried to go to exhibitions that haven't been accessible. I don't know whether we could look at any funding to make even more. I mean, the National Railway Museum is very accessible. So I think, you know, we've got all these amazing assets in York. I mean, I know from going to the Minster and talking with their architects, that they asked York Disability Rights Forum to go along. They're doing incredible things to make York Minster accessible. They're even changing the stonework inside to make ramps which fit in totally with the architecture of the Minster, and they're changing, you know, things that have been there for hundreds of years, and they're doing it because that's what they want to do. They believe it's the right thing to do. So people are leading on this, and I think, you know, I came across as a bit negative earlier. I was really a bit cross. I'm calming down now, but there's so many good things out there. I think you know, we've got to sell those things and work on making them even more of them.
I mean,
yeah, the fund for the lifts.
Yeah, I think I'm, you know, quite right to be, you know, this is a scrutiny committee, absolutely. It's a conversation that we can have with your museums trust. You know, it's the same people who have the Castle Museum, have the art gallery, so it's definitely a conversation we can have. Unlikely UK SPF would be the fund to bid into, but there may well be other funds that we could support them with bids into. But UK SPF itself has got set criteria that you've got to fund against. And that's why you're given the money, essentially. Although not voting to stay in Europe wasn't one of those criteria, because otherwise we wouldn't have got anything, but
I know.
we've got some.
Thanks, councillor Kilbane. Councillor Fenton, appreciate your patience.
That's okay. Just a few sort of comments for Brendan, really, in terms of the tourism strategy, which I think it's helpful, and I now better understand the audience for the strategy, which helps make sense of more of it. I think in relation to the things that are unsaid in terms of the evening economy, I mean, what I took as a sort of a veiled reference to large groups, we'll call them stags and hens, was a focus on quality over volume, which I may have misread that, but I read quality over volume as kind of heading in that direction. It would be helpful to understand if I've understood that correctly. Just a few points really to bear in mind when you're finalising the document. Don't use Americanized English. That kind of set my teeth on edge a little bit reading some of it, and it will come across as not authentic if people say, well, we don't spell that word in that way in this country. Some of the language I found slightly impenetrable, but that's maybe because I'm not the audience for the document. In terms of, in the context section, it refers to the need for new urban governance models and mandating of the visitor economy. It's left me kind of slightly flummoxed. The use of the word local HUD is not one I'm familiar with, so maybe that would benefit from a bit of a description as to what that word means and how the strategy wants to is clearly using that word to represent something and to articulate a particular vision, which I read as this being something that residents are involved in and very much part of. So maybe it works, but it did leave me a little bit kind of scratching my head at the beginning. That's not to criticise the document. I think it's a really good piece of work, but if you could both bear those points in mind. You don't have to respond now, just wanted to feed those points in. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor Fenton. Very practical contributions, I think. Councillor Waller. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay, yeah.
Councillor Rose.
Just to pick up the point that you mentioned around quality, it says specifically value rather than volume, and I wanted to ask that question directly of, is the point that was made, is this talking about the quality of clientele in our establishments in York? But also, is there then an expectation we're trying to drive extra spend per person coming to the city? And that point previously around affordability, is there an element of, actually, if you don't have that much money, we don't really want you in our city? I know that's not what it's saying, but could you elaborate a bit on that value volume piece, please?
Yeah, that's exactly not what it's saying at all. And I think when we were devising the strategy, we were very mindful that the numbers of people that come to York and engage in tourism activities in York, is quite significant. And setting an ambition to kind of grow that number didn't seem sustainable in the context of York and what we wanted to achieve. And actually the focus on the quality and the type of visitor that comes to the city, making sure that it is affordable, absolutely affordable for those who visit, but for residents as well. But also, as you say, that those that do come are spending longer in the city, are spending more in the city as well. And that's a really important part of what we're seeking to achieve as part of the strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Waller, again, appreciate your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the economic partnership update. I don't exactly share the same position as the executive member in believing that Brexit has been only a benefit. I think we need to recognise that there have been significant problems presented to businesses in the city in terms of exporting, in terms of the flexibility.
Councillor Waller, with respect, I don't think that's what the executive member said, but I will invite him to set the record straight once you've finished. But let's keep this within the realms of sensibility, please.
Well, the only references have been about a Brexit benefit, Brexit dividend or whatever. And I think that it would be helpful to understand the work that's being done to address the friction in trade, the increased paperwork in getting to York from EU, and therefore accepting that there are situations that have changed and what is being done to address that, and also in the perception and going back to the tourism strategy in terms of York has a place in Europe and in historical terms, in terms of connections with Europe and the twin cities that we have in Dijon and Munster, to utilize those connections to attract those specialist businesses that you've been talking about, emphasizing York's uniqueness in terms of drawing in those sectors. Thank you, Chair.
I can certainly happily put you right on the Brexit question, Councillor Waller. I think if you play back this meeting later on when you get home, you will find that I said that this was York's one Brexit bonus. I'm sat here struggling to think of any others. There might be a few knocking about somewhere, but for all of the difficulties that Brexit has caused our businesses, and they are many, and our people, and they are many, we did get that one bonus, which was we got some UK SPF funding that was not coming York's way under previous European funding arrangements. So we've taken that money and said thank you very much, and we are spending it in ways that enable our businesses to thrive. But no, it's quite sad to hear the twisting of what I've said to score fairly irrelevant political points for the however many people are watching.
And given that we've had the right of reply exercised on Councillor Waller's other points, might there be any response from any of exec member or guests?
I suppose just from an inward investment point of view, just a reassurance, I suppose that those, you know, the links with the cities you've talked about, but also others, is still an important part of our York as a global city strategy. And I think by way of example, we're hosting the German ambassador tomorrow, isn't it? Yeah, tomorrow, Thursday. And you know, and there's other kind of European-based discussions underway as well. So I can't comment on kind of the business feedback that we're getting around the impact of Brexit, but we do have two business growth managers who meet regularly with local businesses, so I can inquire whether they've had any kind of common messages fed back through their discussions around that. Thank you.
But just to emphasise, really, it was a Dijon a few weeks ago, a month or so ago. We hosted and did some interesting work and talked to them about their sort of regenerative agriculture around the city and how all that works. That's quite an interesting thing for us to explore. We've got the German ambassador tomorrow, and then we've got a visit from Viborg on I think it's Tuesday next week, because they're also a UNESCO City of Media Arts. So in terms of and they're from Denmark, so we're doing a draw with Denmark type event and exploring with them what it's meant for them, and if there are lessons that we can learn to apply over here, and similarly vice versa. So the barriers between York and Europe, far from going up, we are climbing over as often as we possibly can.
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Got one last person on my list because I think he's been very tolerant of my attempt to be a strict chair, which has failed in many ways. Councillor Rose, one more question and then we'll wrap this up. But I think that it's been a long discussion on one item, but I think necessarily so. We always knew our work plan had big ticket items on, and this discussion merits proper time being given to it. So thanks to all members for putting up with me and the time of the session tonight. Councillor Rose, fire away.
Yeah, I've got a question on a supplemental, if that's all right.
Yeah,
I'll see if you stop me on there. And a quick side point first, that I think the reference to tourism levy earlier on is missing from the strategy. It'd be good to have it in there somewhere if there's a way of doing it. I guess one omission, I mentioned kind of from a sector perspective. From a visitor perspective, it talks about tourism, and understandably there are lots of different types of visitor, lots of different types of tourists. It kind of bleeds them all together, and rightly so. But it becomes hard to distinguish between which aspects we're looking at where, and particularly whether we have a strategy for how we're trying to target visitors, whether they're from Doncaster or London or Japan. Is there a strategy, or should we be having it in the strategy as to who we're trying to attract in what ways? Because we might see visitor numbers increase, but if every single person's from Leeds, is that better for us or not? So I guess that's my main question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that would come out of this in terms of a specific plan that might be then devised. So Make It York will be actively involved in that in terms of their own marketing activities and the types of work they would do to attract and target certain markets. So the hope is that this would then lead to those more kind of specific and focused plans that certain organisations or stakeholders will be tasked with delivering.
Yeah, I guess I think it should be in here, because I think we should know if we're trying to grow all sectors or if we're trying to change the dynamic of who visitors are. And my supplemental is, the document doesn't really reference at all suburbs or out of town areas. So there are a few hints, but it doesn't mention Clifton Moor, the designer outlet, Monks Cross, Aiken Front Street, Haxby, Fulford, Strensall, Askenbog, or any of those areas. There are about 30 pictures. The only ones outside of the city walls in York are the station, Holgate Windmill, the stadium, and Community Woodlands. But there is mention of York Central, Castle Gateway, and some named places centrally. So coming back to what Pete said earlier around, we don't want to name everything specifically, it'll go on forever. Totally get that. But it does feel like we're naming a lot of city centre places and putting a lot of investment and time and space on the page to the city centre. If we're talking about the number of overnight stays, shopping, eating, a lot of that is those out of town places, particularly with the limitations on transport, car-free city type approaches. It feels missing. Is there more that we could put in there? Is there more thinking around that that's not here? Is that something you're expecting to only go at a detail level? I'd like your thoughts on that. Thanks.
I mean, that's a really valid and welcome comment. And we've tried hard not to make it a city centre strategy through the language, for the imageries that we've used. And it's really helpful to have your feedback on that, because clearly we need to do some more work on making sure that there is that broad representation, and it isn't a city centre focused document. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And thanks for the answers. I'm going to attempt to get some recommendations agreed. I think there's been some really good suggestions tonight. I'll reel off a few, and then if members think I've missed any, shout up. First one I want to touch on is, I mean, I need to be clear with the people in front of me. I'm assuming that for at least some of these, you're going to address them anyway, but it's good to get it down, So the point that Councillor Fenton raised around the language, Americanized English, local HUD, which, it's nice to learn a new word, so, it caught my attention, but reviewing that really and making sure it's accessible. Obviously it has particular audiences, but if a lay resident picks this thing up, it's still got to make sense, hasn't it? But that's an ongoing challenge. So a recommendation that the tourism strategy, the language within it, is reviewed to be more accessible. Any objections or additions to that? No, thank you. Cheers. What else have I got? Some sort of, another presentational point. So within the imagery used, the naming of particular places, events, a recommendation that an effort is made to try and present a sort of more whole York strategy that sells. Obviously you can't name everything, otherwise you'd be here all day and it'd be a very long document, but just reviewing what's currently in it compared to what it could be. I'm sure you'll find a form of words, Robert, but any objections from colleagues or additions? No, thank you. Thankfully these things are recorded. Councillor Whitcroft raised a point earlier on almost at the start of the meeting around working in a recommendation or action within I think the skills and recruitment section of the strategy, which sort of addressed support for workers. And that was with reference to the Get Me Home Safely motion that we recently went through council, but I'm sure there's plenty of other stuff around that. Any comments, additions to that? I mean, Councillor, go on.
Just in terms of articulating that within the tourism strategy, in terms of the focus on staff safety and staff staff being able to access employment.
Yeah, basically, as a sort of addition to what's already in there around improving recruitment to the sector. Again, I don't want to get hung up on the exact form of words, but I don't think it's very contentious, and we can give license to my colleague to the right of me to capture that. Go on.
Sorry, so we're asking for it to make reference to the Get Me Home Safely campaign or specific objectives of that campaign?
I mean, whether it names that campaign or not, I'm not overly fussed, but I think it should include a recommendation for the strategy to include an action around safety of workers and supporting their access to and from their labouring in the sector. That's I wouldn't write that sentence down anywhere, but there'll be a better form of words that experts will find. I think we'll get what I'm trying to get at. Thank you. And thanks for asking too. Councillor Jane Burton made a series of points around what appears to be, whether it's intentional or not. I suspect it's not intentional, but it's still important. A sort of lack of focus around accessibility and inclusion in the tourism strategy. And I think that could be, so this would be a recommendation to review the draft strategy as is before it goes to sign off, to see where meaningful references can be made to that, to communicate that it's important to all those involved in the strategy. But there were specific points in there around the purple pound, board representation. Sorry, Councillor Hook, forgive me.
Accessibility in hotels.
Yes, accessibility of hotels. Now, look, like with any strategy, a lot of it's aspirational, but if it's not there, there's nothing to aspire to. I thought all of those contributions were excellent, by the way. You got the best bit out right at the start, so that's in my opinion. Cheers. Now, colleagues, have I missed anything else? I think that there might be something around more clearly articulating benefit to local residents. Now, I know the document is trying to do that already. There's a specific chapter on it. But maybe that's part of the whole accessibility of language and what do you mean by local HUD? So I don't think that needs to be an extra recommendation. I'm thinking out loud here, obviously. But colleagues, is there anything else that you think could go in that I've not mentioned? Councillor Rose?
I don't think it necessarily has to be in what we've said. I think it's something that has been heard and will hopefully be taken away. But the strategy not necessarily being a strategy, not covering every industry in York or the whole geography of York, and not tackling what tourists we want to see in the city feel like omissions to me in the points that I've previously made. I don't know if there's anything we would want to. I'm not even on your committee officially, right? So I don't know what the group
just
would
as
like
much
to
of
say.
a right, but I mean, if you could try and package that up in a, if you want a recommendation on any of that, could you?
I'll leave it to if anybody else feels there's a recommendation to be made. A personal recommendation that I think there could be all those areas looked at within the context before it reaches executive. But whether the committee feels there's anything in there.
Okay, well, I think, again, thinking out loud here, one of the points in that I thought it might not be possible, but it'd be good to recommend. it'd be good for the strategy to include some sort of reference to how we're going to get people in. Maybe you could call that chapter from Donny to Japan. That's Doncaster. But I appreciate that will come in a different document somewhere, but it'd be good to capture that if possible. But the other stuff I think Councillor Stewart talked about is focusing on specific things. In my opinion, and I'm open to the committee's view, I think that's too much of a shift from what the document currently is. The document's going in a particular way. It's trying to do a lot of things, and I wouldn't want to recommend that we sort of remove a massive chunk of it so as to focus on 2 or 3 specifics. Councillor Jane Burton.
Well, I'm just thinking sort of about that. I mean, we're talking about the sort of the drinking culture, the going out. But there's also the museum culture, the children's aspect to our city, which is huge. So I don't know whether that could be incorporated as well, or different aspects of races. They're all great aspects to our city. And here on this strategy, a thriving workforce, which encompasses the getting home safely in a way, and maybe the living wage. There's nobody in a wheelchair or with a stick here. I just noticed. Sorry.
Well, you mean so in
Page 21 for the.
Page 21.
people online.
Yeah, sorry, strategy themes. But we could make it more inclusive here already.
Oh, I see what you mean. So
Yes.
there's a specific comment here in relation to the sort of yellow graphic in the middle
That's
of page
right.
21.
And again, to a thriving workforce with the getting home safely, because surely a thriving workforce would be a workforce whose general well-being was looked after.
I hear you on
Yes.
that. I would say I think that recommendation has sort of captured that, and once the recommendation is put forward, we have to have some faith that a good form of words will be found. But on that specific graphic, page 21, I think it's a good point. And I think I would tie that into the point around reviewing the accessibility of the document. Shouldn't just apply to language. It should apply to the graphics too. Thanks, Councillor Burton. Did I have another hand before you? Councillor Healy.
Yeah, 3 things really. One, just make some of the graphics clearer and more self-explanatory.
Was that, sorry, can you repeat that? Graphics, did you say?
Yeah, the graphics. Some of the graphs you can't read unless they're in colour. Some of the graphics, we couldn't work out what they were.
Oh, yeah, so that includes the economic strategy bit as well.
I think that it was our presentation to the partnership, so I think giving the presentation, it was probably explained on the day, and we've just attached that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, for future reports, it's about being clear on.
Make it clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second one was you were going to do some work around people living in York, but essentially working out outside of York, which I guess has exploded in the last couple of years. Third one, picking up a point that probably Councillor Stewart would make if he's here, that directly contradicts what Councillor Taylor's just said.
Yeah.
What you might want to think about is just adding like little case study blocks that sort of say, the example I would use is, I don't think without the council, Hiscox would have come here. Now, admittedly, we sold them some land below market value. But that's the only example I can think of, like a major employer coming to York based upon attributable actions to the council. So if you've got a couple of those scattering through here, it takes it from the what's the word I'm looking for? Aspirational to concrete, which would address some of the issues that Councillor Stewart was raising.
Just to be clear on that, and I probably should have mentioned that earlier, is that at the end of the financial year, we were intending to do essentially a a summary of what's been achieved. So that would be that sort of document. So it's more accessible, kind of, this is what's happened, this is what's been achieved, and here's some case studies of what we've been doing with business or whatever. So yeah,
Scatter them around.
That's in the plan. I should have mentioned that.
And the second point you raised, Councillor Healy, I would, and challenge me if you see it differently. I imagine that exchange to be Catherine going away, finding out the answer and emailing the committee members. This is the question of people living in York but working.
Yeah. And just actually, is that something that we want to encourage? I would suggest it is, because
No, we want them all to relocate to York. Have a word with your friend.
yes, that is indeed true. But yeah, is it something that we do want to encourage? Do we want to encourage people to come and live in York and essentially work out of London? Which, okay, fair enough. But
I mean,
I do get paid a lot of money.
If we could
pay it.
if we can keep, well, I mean, look, respond as you would like to in writing by email to the whole committee if you can, but be interesting to know the answer to the specific question about whether someone's GVA is lost to another area if they're working elsewhere but living in York.
I guess what I'm most interested in is where do they spend their money?
If I leave the city walls, I get you.
So those lunchtime meal deals being
Yeah,
purchased
no, it's
elsewhere.
important, isn't it? So I mean, they may be technically employed in London, but actually they work constantly from York, and that's so the money's kept in our local economy, which is what we're after.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I say that every time we meet, and I think that's a good thing. I'm always defending myself, blimey. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this item. Thank you ever so much for your time and your answers and your contributions. It's much appreciated. And colleagues, will jump to the next item, which I think is just a quick look at the work plan. It is. We had a discussion at the end of the last meeting around task groups. Forgive me if I'm wrong, colleagues, but I don't think I've received anything on that yet by members. But equally, I too haven't put together my own brief on the task group idea that I had. So we next meet in January. I'll send something out in writing, just to prompt us on this. But if we do want to do some task groups and we want them to be a meaningful exercise, let's put together, if you like, proposals, and then we'll look at them in the official papers at the next meeting. We'll likely also have this economic framework for the combined authority. So there'll be a consideration as to where that goes. There's a scrutiny chairs meeting on the 18th of December, so we might be able to sort that then, and I'd welcome members' blessing to possibly decide that then, rather than doing it by email between ourselves or waiting for January to agree when we look at the economic framework. So any issues with that? Cool. Look forward to that meeting, Councillor Fenton, just before Christmas. Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for work plan as far as I'm concerned. Councillor Ben Burton.
So I guess I don't know whether we have the power, and I don't know whether this is the right scrutiny committee, but touching on the conversation about York Central before, I think it's important a scrutiny committee at some point gets the master developer into the room and presents members with an opportunity to, is that coming to that committee that you chair? Yeah, great, because obviously it's quite they have an important role and we don't have enough of opportunity to speak to them or input into their process. So yeah, as long as it's going to a committee, that's fine. It doesn't need to come to every committee.
Sure, do you want to respond to that?
I think there'll come a point where currently York Central comes to corporate scrutiny because it's a major project.
Yeah.
There'll come a point where it's no longer a project, it's a thing, it's something that's happening on the ground. And I would see that then kind of reverting back to the relevant sort of service specific scrutiny committee, which obviously would be this one for York Central. So we'll need to think about at what point that transition needs to happen. But the key thing at the moment is that there is scrutiny involvement, particularly when it comes to engaging with the lead developer and investor. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Councillor Burton. But yeah, I mean, we looked at it at corporate scrutiny last night. It was last night, wasn't it? Yeah, and we only had council officers present for that, which was frustrating and a bit alienating, in my personal opinion. So yeah, we'll definitely be having them back once the master developer is present, because there's a lot to get stuck into. Yeah. Anything else, colleagues, or Councillor Rose?
Yeah, just to quite, this is me being fresh-faced and not knowing what you've discussed in the past and what might be coming up, but noting the point around broadband installation issues and the conversation around that,
Yeah.
and then the council motion at full council around the phone lines and broadband situation, and then noting that basically all of York's digital businesses we've been discussing this evening were wiped out by a broadband outage that may have scared or spooked a few of the businesses in the digital sector. Maybe if it isn't covered, it's worth kind of extending that across general York internet and broadband more widely. If it's your remit. Anyway.
I see where you're coming from. I mean,
we made a big deal out of being the first gigabit city, and since then it doesn't feel like we've followed through and actually having a fully digital city.
Yeah.
And there are a few related issues that all seem to feed into each other. So tackling a bit of the pie, maybe.
I get you, but I totally hear you. I mean, what I would say is, so this idea came initially from Councillor Nelson, and I think the thrust behind where she was coming from with it, and this doesn't contradict anything that you're saying, but where I'm getting at is, I think that she wanted to discuss how the introduction of those utilities across the city is managed, and how residents can, and even councillors and the council can make sure that those works are done in a reasonable way, and that residents know how to chase up issues, because I think most wards have had problems with UFO broadband over the years. And if that conversation gets too wide, because it's already complex enough, it could be a very long meeting. But look, I hear you. The motion around the analog switch off, that will, I think one of its recommendations was that Scrutiny do look at it. I'm sure Scrutiny will. But as you can see, there's not many meetings, and we have too many things to fill them with. So I guess that what I can say is I'll make best endeavours to capture as much of that versus other pressures, which is painfully sit on the fence. But got to be realistic. Councillor Healy.
Yeah, two questions. Microphone not switched on. First question, Courting Monitor 3. Is that coming to the 15th of Jan meeting on the 27th of Feb?
I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll find out. Second question related to that. Do the budget suggestions, do they go to scrutiny before they go to full council or not?
Not normally.
No?
No.
Well, I thought they did. Okay, fine.
So I think there's usually some sort of exec member-led process before full council itself that people can speak to, make representations at. There was previously. Councillor Jane Burton.
Sorry, I was about the broadband.
Microphone.
About the broadband and the copper switchover. I was looking at the agenda and the 27th of February. It's your Waterworks health check. Do you think we could tack on a small item about that, an update? To see if anything has happened, because it is really important for older people and people who rely on alarm systems and those sorts of things. Just not a long item, or do you think that would be too much?
I look, once again, I hear you. With full respect, and I think we're all learning this, it's very easy to say not a long item, because these subjects are so there's so much to these things when they come and we get stuck into them. I mean, it's taken over 2 hours to
Yeah.
look at one item tonight.
Very
But,
important item for our city tourism.
well, it was
really.
exactly, so they're all important
Yeah.
and we'd all like them to be as efficient as possible. The programme is already
Uh-huh.
crowded,
Mhm.
but I acknowledge the motion went through, I think unanimously. It's a really important issue for all sorts of reasons, including the ones you've raised. So if we can get it in, I'd like to, within my time as chair. But obviously the calendar only goes up to April. There'll be many more meetings after then. And that'll be for whoever's the chair then to decide, but I'll do what I can.
Okay, it's just the digital switch off is December 25. And
Yeah.
the digital switch on and the copper switch off.
Which
sorry.
is a,
Right.
you know, that is on the, I would say that's on the scales for the weighing up of what goes where, but I'm not going to sit here tonight and say, yes, we'll put it in that month because there's a devolution item.
Yeah.
And other things that will fill what's already busy even more. So if we are going to act with urgency and put things in, and other things will go, and we'll all have to roll with it.
Yeah.
I hope that's fair enough. And thank you all once again. We'll finish the item. I don't have any urgent business. I don't even, is that even on the agenda? Yeah, there is an urgent business item. I've got none. Thanks. Let's close it. Cheers. Thanks.